with $800,000 in cash, more money than she would see in 10 lifetimes, enough to leave the streets behind, start over, and never go hungry again. In her left hand, do the right thing. Return it to its owner, remain in misery, remain invisible. Maria was 52 years old. She slept under bridges. She ate from the trash. She was treated like a ghost by society. And now, for the first time in her life, fate had placed a fortune literally in her hands. No one would know if she kept the money. No one. But she did something that shocked an entire town, something that made a millionaire farmer cry, something that proved that character has nothing to do with a bank account. This is the most emotional story you will hear today. A story about honesty when no one is watching, about dignity when you have nothing left, and about how a single act of kindness can change 2 lives forever. If you believe there are still good people in the world, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because stories that restore your faith in humanity can only be found here. And comment, "Character has no price," if this story has already moved you. Now get the tissues ready, because what comes next will touch your heart in a way you don't expect. The small town of Meadowbrook, in the rural heart of Texas, had that typical small-town characteristic. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. The main streets were few, maybe 6 or 7 blocks, forming the commercial center. There was a grocery store, 2 gas stations, an imposing Baptist church dominating the central square, a diner serving coffee from 5 in the morning until 10 at night, and little else. The official population was 4,800 people, although on weekends that number swelled with visitors from surrounding farms who came into town to shop or attend church. It was the kind of place where cars honked in greeting as they passed each other, where the sheriff knew every child by name, where secrets were impossible to keep because gossip traveled faster than high-speed internet. But there were people who lived there who were completely invisible. People society had decided to stop seeing. Maria Gonzalez was one of them. At 52 years old, she had already spent 8 long years living on the streets of Meadowbrook. Her home was beneath the concrete bridge that crossed the small dry river at the eastern exit of town, where Highway 77 began its journey toward Austin. It wasn't much, just a space of about 10 feet by 13 feet, protected from rain by the bridge structure above, partially hidden from the road by a cluster of wild-grown bushes. There, she had an old mattress someone had thrown away years earlier, stained and torn in several places, but still usable. She had 3 blankets she had collected over the years, one thick one for Texas winters, which could be surprisingly cold, and 2 lighter ones for the other seasons. A blue plastic tarp she stretched out when it rained heavily and water began to run down the sides of the bridge. A large plastic grocery bag containing all her worldly possessions, 2 extra changes of clothes, both so worn they barely held together, a pair of socks without holes that she guarded like a treasure, a toothbrush that no longer had many bristles, a faded, folded photograph of her wedding 25 years earlier, where she and Roberto smiled at the camera with no idea how cruel life would be, and a hardcover Bible the Baptist church pastor had given her 3 years earlier, telling her she would always have a friend in Jesus, even if she had no one else. No one in Meadowbrook knew exactly how Maria had ended up that way. There were rumors, of course. In a small town, there always are. Some said it was drug addiction, that she had destroyed her own life with methamphetamine, so common in rural Texas. Others whispered that it was untreated mental illness, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, that had caused her to lose touch with reality. Others still, the more charitable ones, said simply that it was bad luck, a series of unfortunate events that could happen to anyone. The truth, as is always the case with real human stories, was more complicated than any single rumor could capture. Maria had once had a normal life, not glamorous, not especially successful, but normal. She had grown up in San Antonio, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who worked hard to give their children a better life than they had known. Her father worked construction for 40 years. Her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. Maria was the first in her family to finish high school. That was a source of immense pride. She got a job as a janitorial assistant at the municipal hospital in San Antonio. Not much, but it paid the bills. She met Roberto at a church party when she was 24. He worked as a mechanic, had skilled hands, and a gentle smile. They married 6 months later in a simple but beautiful ceremony. For 15 years, they lived a modest but happy life. They never had children. They tried, but it never happened. Something that brought sadness, but that they eventually accepted. They lived in a small apartment, paid rent on time, went to church every Sunday, saved a little bit each month, dreaming that maybe one day they would buy a small house. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, and they had each other, and that seemed enough. Then Roberto began to feel stomach pain. At first, he ignored it. Men do that, especially men from humble backgrounds who are taught to endure pain and keep working. But the pain worsened. Eventually, when he finally went to the doctor, it was already too late. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. The treatment was expensive, very expensive. Even with the basic insurance they had, the deductibles and co-pays were astronomical. Maria sold everything of value she owned, which wasn't much. She took out loans. She borrowed money from loan sharks when banks refused. She would do anything to save Roberto, anything to give him a chance. But cancer doesn't care about love or sacrifice or the will to fight. Roberto died 8 months after the diagnosis on a Tuesday morning, holding Maria's hand, whispering that he loved her with his last breath. Maria was left not only a widow, but completely financially destroyed. The medical debts totaled more than $200,000. The loan sharks wanted their money. She lost the apartment 3 months later because she could no longer pay the rent. She lost her hospital job because depression made her non-functional. She missed days in a row, couldn't concentrate when she was present, lived in a fog of grief and medication prescribed by a free clinic doctor that only made her feel like a zombie. Her parents had died years earlier. She had a brother somewhere in Arizona who hadn't spoken to her in a decade. After a family argument she could no longer even remember the reason for. She had no support network, nowhere to go. She slept in her car for a few months until the car was repossessed for non-payment. After that, it was the streets. She stayed in San Antonio for 2 years, moving from shelter to shelter, but shelters were terrible places, violent, dangerous, where her few belongings were constantly stolen, where drunk or drugged men made threats or worse. Eventually she left San Antonio, thinking maybe a smaller town would be safer, kinder. She caught a ride with a truck driver heading toward Dallas, who dropped her off in Meadowbrook because he had to stop there. "Seems like a quiet place," the trucker said. "Good luck, ma'am." Maria stayed. She found the bridge. She set up her small camp, and for 8 years, that was her home. 8 years sleeping on hard concrete. 8 years being hungry more days than not. 8 years being invisible to a town that passed by her without really seeing her. Most people ignored her completely. To them, she was just part of the decaying urban landscape, like trash in the gutter or graffiti on walls. Something unpleasant you preferred not to look at directly. Some were actively hostile. Teenagers sometimes threw things at her when driving past, shouting insults. "Get a job, bum! Get out of our town!" Things like that. Maria learned not to react, to lower her head and wait for them to leave. Some shop owners chased her away if she got too close to their stores. "You're driving customers away," they said. "Get lost," as if she were a stray dog, not a person. But there was kindness too, occasionally. The diner owner, a heavy-set 60-year-old man named Frank, let her pick food out of the trash behind the establishment. He even began setting leftovers aside in a clean plastic bag a few times a week, leaving it on top of the dumpster where she could easily grab it. He never spoke to her directly, but the gesture was kind. The woman who worked at the laundromat Mrs. Chen, an immigrant from Taiwan, sometimes let Maria use the machines for free when the place was empty. "Quick, quick," she would say, nervously watching the door in case a customer came in. "You wash fast." Maria washed her clothes on those precious occasions, feeling human again for a few hours as she waited for the wash and dry cycles to finish. The Baptist church pastor, Reverend Thomas, a tall black man with graying hair and a deep voice that resonated during sermons, regularly tried to convince Maria to accept more substantial help. "Maria," he would say, "we have programs. We can help you find shelter, maybe even a job. You don't have to live like this." But Maria always refused gently. Part of her had given up. Another part felt deep shame, the kind of shame that comes from having fallen so far that accepting help feels like admitting final defeat. "I'm fine, Reverend," she lied. "God takes care of me." And in a way, she believed it. Because she was still alive, wasn't she? After 8 years on the streets, in all seasons, in cold and heat, sick and healthy, she was still here. That had to mean something. Or maybe it meant nothing at all, and she was just surviving out of sheer stubbornness, body and mind, refusing to give up even when maybe they should. She didn't know. She didn't think about it much most of the time. Deep thinking was a luxury for people with free time. When you're on the streets, you think about where your next meal will come from, where you'll sleep if it starts raining, whether that group of teenagers on the corner is planning to hurt you. You live moment to moment, not making big plans, because plans require a future, and when you live on the streets, the future is too foggy to contemplate. Antonio Ferreira, on the other hand, had more future than he knew what to do with. At 65 years old, he was at the peak of an extraordinary life built through hard work, smart decisions, and a bit of good timing. His story was the kind of classic American story politicians like to invoke in speeches. An immigrant who arrived with nothing and built an empire through sweat and determination. His father, Manuel Ferreira, had arrived in Texas from Portugal in the 1950s at 16 years old, speaking not a single word of English, with exactly $27 in his pocket and the address of a distant cousin written on a piece of paper. Manuel worked at anything he could get, washing dishes, cleaning stables, eventually saving enough to buy 12 acres of mostly worthless land on the outskirts of what would later become Meadowbrook. Land no one wanted, land that was more rock than soil, land that cost almost nothing because it was worth almost nothing. But Manuel worked that land with fanatical determination. He cleared the rocks one by one, hauling them in an old wheelbarrow. He enriched the soil with compost he made himself. He planted, experimented, failed, and tried again. He married a Mexican woman named Lucia, whom he met at church, a small but strong woman who worked just as hard as he did. They had 3 children. Antonio was the oldest. Antonio grew up working that land alongside his father. From the age of 7, he woke before sunrise, did his chores on the farm, went to school, came back, and did more chores until dark. It was a hard life, but he never knew anything different, so he didn't complain. He was intelligent and loved school, especially math and science. His high school teacher, Mrs. Patterson, once told his parents that Antonio had the potential to go to college, maybe even earn a scholarship. Manuel was proud, but practical. "College is good," he said in his still broken English after decades in the country. "But land is safe. Land doesn't go away. You work the land works for you." So Antonio didn't go to college. Instead, at 18, he began working the farm full-time alongside his father. And he applied his natural intelligence to agribusiness the same way he would have applied it to any university degree. He read obsessively about farming techniques, crop rotation, soil management. He experimented with different plants, different methods. He kept meticulous records of every crop, every expense, every bit of revenue, analyzing the numbers with an accountant's eye, despite having no formal education. When his father died of a heart attack at 61, working in the fields as he had his entire life, Antonio inherited the property. It was now 30 acres. Manuel had managed to buy another 18 acres over the years. 30 acres wasn't much in the context of Texas agribusiness, but it was a beginning. Antonio was 28 years old. Over the next 37 years, he turned those 30 acres into an empire. He bought more land when prices were low, when other farmers were selling in panic during agricultural crises. He diversified his crops intelligently, never putting all his eggs in one basket. He invested in modern equipment when it made sense, but never spent just for the sake of spending. He was extremely frugal, living modestly even as his net worth grew. He married briefly at 35 to a local woman, but the marriage lasted only 3 years before she left, frustrated by his fanatical devotion to work and his refusal to spend money on things she considered important, like a beautiful house, vacations, or designer clothes. "You're rich, but you live like a beggar," she accused when she left. "What's the point of having money if you don't use it?" Antonio didn't try to explain that to him, the point of money wasn't spending it on frivolities, but the security it provided, the freedom to never be vulnerable the way his father had been. Always one late payment or bad harvest away from losing everything. He let her go without much of a fight. They had no children. He had been alone ever since, which actually suited him well. He was solitary by nature, comfortable with his own company, his simple routines, his constant work. Now, at 65 years old, Antonio owned more than 2,965 acres of prime land across 3 different properties around Meadowbrook. His operation employed 38 full-time workers and another 50 during harvest seasons. He mainly grew cotton and sorghum, with some areas dedicated to cattle. His net worth, if he decided to sell everything today, would easily be north of $40 million, maybe 50. He had never calculated it exactly and didn't care. Numbers were just numbers. He still woke up at 4 in the morning, still drank simple black coffee with no sugar on the porch of his house. The same house where he had grown up, which he had expanded modestly over the years, but which remained fundamentally a simple 2-bedroom wooden structure. He still wore Wrangler jeans and flannel shirts from Walmart. He still drove a 2004 Ford F-150 with 123,000 miles on the odometer, which he kept running through meticulous maintenance. To anyone in Meadowbrook, Antonio Ferreira was just a successful local farmer. Respected, certainly. Hard-working, obviously. But no one really understood the scale of his wealth because he made no effort to display it. And that was exactly how he wanted it. It was a Friday in November, one of those Texas fall mornings when the air is cool and crisp, but you know it will be warm again by afternoon. Antonio woke up as usual at 4, made his coffee, checked the weather on the old kitchen radio that had been in the house since the 1970s and still worked perfectly. He worked a few hours in the field, supervising a crew performing maintenance on an irrigation system. At 9:30 he returned home, showered, changed into relatively cleaner clothes, relatively because they were still work clothes, just without fresh mud, and got into his truck. He had an unusual task today, going to the bank in Austin. Austin was about 34 miles away, roughly a 50-minute drive down Highway 77 if you obeyed the speed limits, which Antonio always did. He hated going to Austin. The city had grown absurdly over the past decades, transforming from a relatively calm state capital into a tech metropolis of nearly 1 million people. Horrible traffic, rushed people, everything expensive and complicated. But today it was necessary. He needed to handle some banking matters that required physical presence, signatures on documents, identity verification, that kind of bureaucracy that still hadn't been fully digitized despite all the promises of modern technology. More specifically, Antonio needed to withdraw a significant amount of cash, $800,000 to be exact. It was an absurdly large amount to be carrying in cash, and he knew it. His accountant, Richard Chen, husband of Mrs. Chen from the laundromat, although Antonio didn't know that connection, had argued vigorously against it. "Mr. Ferreira," Richard had said during the planning call the week before, "this is insane in 2024. Nobody uses that much physical cash. It's dangerous, inconvenient, and frankly draws unwanted attention. Why not use bank transfers or checks?" But Antonio had his reasons. He was hiring a large crew of temporary workers, mostly immigrants, for a special project clearing and preparing a new piece of land he had purchased. Many of those workers preferred to be paid in cash, some because they didn't have bank accounts, others because they had complicated immigration situations, and still others simply because they preferred cash for personal reasons. Antonio respected that. He himself had grown up in a household where his father didn't trust banks, kept money in an old safe hidden in the bedroom, a mindset of a previous generation immigrant. So, $800,000 in cash to pay 80 workers, $10,000 each, for 2 weeks of hard labor clearing land full of rocks and brush. It was generous. He could probably hire them for $7,000 or $8,000 each. But Antonio always paid well. Well-paid workers work better, stay loyal, and don't steal. The bank in Austin, First National Texas Bank, was located downtown, a modern 12-story glass building that screamed new tech money. Antonio parked in a public parking garage 3 blocks away. It cost $25 for 2 hours, which made him shake his head in disbelief. In Meadowbrook, you parked wherever you wanted for free, and walked to the bank carrying an old camping backpack that had belonged to his father. The backpack was empty for now, but it wouldn't be for long. Inside the bank, he was directed to the private sector, a separate area with leather sofas and free coffee where clients with large balances were treated like royalty. His account manager, a smooth man in his mid-40s named David Morrison, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Antonio's truck, greeted him with an overly enthusiastic handshake. "Mr. Ferreira, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. We usually only speak by phone or email. Please, have a seat." They sat. Coffee was offered to Antonio, which he accepted. It was good, he admitted mentally, much better than what he made at home. David went through the documents that needed to be signed, explaining each one, even though Antonio had already read everything carefully at home. 30 minutes later, the bureaucratic part was complete. "Now, about the withdrawal," David said, his tone growing slightly uncomfortable. $800,000 in cash. I have to ask one more time, Mr. Ferreira. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider? That's a very large amount to be carrying physically. We could arrange cashier's checks, wire transfers, or—" "Cash," Antonio interrupted politely but firmly. "It has to be cash. I've already explained why." David sighed. "I understand. All right. I'll need about 20 minutes to prepare it. That amount isn't normally available at a branch. We had to make a special request to the Federal Reserve. It will be mostly $100 bills. Is that acceptable?" "Perfectly acceptable. And would you like a security escort to your vehicle? We can arrange—" "That won't be necessary," Antonio said. "I'll be fine." David clearly doubted that, but didn't argue further. He disappeared into a restricted area at the back of the bank. Antonio waited, sipping his coffee, watching other wealthy clients come and go, all of them looking so important and hurried. 25 minutes later, David returned with 2 security guards pushing a cart. On top of the cart was a metal box. They went into a private room. David opened the box. Inside, meticulously organized, were 80 bundles of $100 bills each, every bundle secured with a bank paper band. $800,000. Antonio had seen a lot of money before, but he admitted that seeing it all together in physical form was impressive. "I need you to count and confirm," David said. Antonio counted meticulously. Every bundle. It took 15 minutes. Everything was correct. He signed a document confirming receipt. Then carefully, he transferred all the bundles into his old backpack. The backpack became full and heavy. $800,000 in $100 bills weighs approximately 17.6 pounds. Antonio slung the backpack over his shoulders. He thanked David. He declined the security escort again. "I'll be fine," he repeated. "I'm going straight home." He left the bank, walked the 3 blocks back to the parking garage. No one bothered him. No one paid special attention to him. He was just another old man with an old backpack, got into his truck and started driving home. It was 11:15 a.m. If everything went well, he would be home around noon, put the money in the safe he had at home. A much better safe than his father's old one, a half-ton Browning safe embedded in concrete in the basement that nothing short of explosives would open. And then have lunch, maybe a sandwich. He had ham in the fridge. Simple plan, but life rarely respects simple plans. Antonio had been driving for about 40 minutes. He was approximately 9, 3 miles from Meadowbrook when his truck started making a strange noise, a metallic rattling sound coming from somewhere under the hood. He frowned. The truck was old, but he maintained it meticulously. He had changed the oil just 2 weeks earlier. What could it be? The noise worsened. Then smoke began seeping out from the sides of the hood. Not good. Definitely not good. Antonio turned on his blinker, not that there was anyone else on the road at that moment, but habits are habits, and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. He turned off the engine, waited a moment, then stepped out. He walked to the front of the truck and lifted the hood. More smoke billowed out, making him step back momentarily. When the smoke cleared a bit, he looked inside. Cooling system failure, it seemed. A hose had burst, coolant was leaking, the engine had overheated. Fixable, certainly, but not here on the side of the road without tools or parts. He would need a tow. Antonio pulled his cell phone from his pocket, an old iPhone that Richard had insisted he buy years earlier. "Mr. Ferreira, you need at least a basic cell phone. What if you have an emergency?" He checked the signal. 1 bar. Maybe it would work. He tried calling his mechanic in Meadowbrook, Eddie Rodriguez, who took care of his vehicle fleet. The phone made that frustrating sound of a call that doesn't fully connect. He tried again. Same result. Not enough signal. Antonio looked around. He was on a particularly rural and empty stretch of Highway 77. On one side of the road, fields stretched to the horizon, belonging to some other farmer. On the other side, more fields, then a line of trees marking some creek or property boundary. No buildings in sight. No other car had passed since he pulled over. He looked down the road in both directions. Behind him toward Austin, far too far to walk. Ahead toward Meadowbrook, about 9.3 miles. Still far, especially carrying 17.6 pounds in a backpack at 65 years old. But what was the alternative? He couldn't just sit and wait for someone to show up. This was rural Texas on a weekday morning. It could be an hour. It could be 3 hours before another vehicle passed. And he was definitely not going to leave $800,000 unprotected in a broken-down truck. No, he would have to walk, carry the backpack. Eventually the cell phone signal would improve and he'd be able to make a call. Or he'd get close enough to Meadowbrook that someone he knew would pass by and offer a ride. Decision made. Antonio pulled the backpack back onto his shoulders. Heavy, God. When was the last time he had carried this much weight? Locked the truck and began walking along the shoulder toward home. He walked for maybe 15-20 minutes. The November sun was pleasant, not too hot, but he was still sweating from the effort and the weight of the backpack. His back began to complain. 65 is not 60. He kept checking his phone every few minutes. Still not enough signal. Then he heard a vehicle approaching from behind. He turned and raised his hand in the universal "I need help" gesture. It was a red Chevy pickup, a newer model. It slowed down and pulled over beside him. The driver rolled down the window. Antonio recognized the face immediately. Joe Patterson, owner of Patterson's Grocery in Meadowbrook, a man in his early 50s whom Antonio had known for decades. "Mr. Ferreira," Joe said, surprised. "What are you doing walking along the road?" "Joe, my lucky day. My truck broke down a few miles back. I was trying to walk until I got cell signal." "Hop in, man. I'll take you to town." "You're a lifesaver," Antonio said sincerely, opening the door and climbing into the passenger seat. He placed the backpack on the floor between his legs, holding it casually but firmly. Joe put the truck in gear. "Where were you coming from? Austin?" "Yes, had some banking business to take care of. And the truck just broke down. Cooling system problem. I'll need to call Eddie for a tow." "Want me to drop you at Eddie's shop?" "No, if you can drop me at home, that'd be great. I'll call him from there." They drove, chatting casually about small-town things, how the grocery store was doing, how the high school football team was having a good season, about the weather. Comfortable conversation between two people who had lived in the same small community for a long time. It took about 15 minutes to reach the outskirts of Meadowbrook. "Where do you want me to drop you?" Joe asked. "At the farm. That'd add another 10 minutes. "No. Drop me downtown, right in front of the grocery store. I'll walk from there. It's not far. You've already helped me enough." "You sure?" "Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. I owe you one." "You don't owe me anything. That's what neighbors do." Joe stopped the pickup in front of the grocery store. Antonio thanked him again, grabbed his backpack and stepped out. Joe waved and drove toward the store's rear parking lot. Antonio started walking home. It was maybe 0.93 miles. Not far. He was thinking about how best to handle the tow situation when he realized the backpack. He wasn't carrying the backpack. For one moment of pure panic, he thought he had left it inside Joe's pickup. But no, he remembered grabbing it. He remembered putting it on his shoulder when he got out. So where? And then he remembered. When Joe asked if he was sure about where he wanted to be dropped off, Antonio had set the backpack down on the ground beside the pickup while they finished the conversation through the open window. He had said thank you. Joe had driven away, and Antonio had simply started walking. Without the backpack, without the $800,000. "No," Antonio whispered, turning quickly and almost running back to where Joe had dropped him off. "A minute ago. Just 1 minute. The backpack would still be there. It had to be." But it wasn't. The spot on the sidewalk where Joe had stopped, where Antonio had stepped out, was empty. He looked around frantically. The street was empty. It was 12:15 p.m. on a weekday. Most people were at home, at work, or having lunch. No one on the street, and no old camping backpack containing a fortune in cash. Someone had taken it. In the 60 seconds between Antonio setting it down and realizing his mistake, someone had passed by and simply taken it, walked away with $800,000. Antonio felt something he rarely felt: real panic. His heart raced. His hands began to tremble slightly. 800,000, gone because of his own stupidity, his own carelessness. He ran a hand over his face. He thought quickly. What to do? Call the police, obviously. Report the theft. No, not technically theft. He had abandoned the property, even if accidentally. Lost property, then. What were the chances of recovery? In a small town like Meadowbrook, maybe reasonable. Someone had to have seen something. Security cameras, maybe? He looked around. Did Joe's grocery store have cameras? Probably. Most businesses did nowadays. He started walking quickly toward the store to ask Joe to check the footage. Then stopped. Wait. Think clearly. If he officially reported this, the police would ask what was in the backpack. He would have to say $800,000. They would ask why he was carrying that much cash. He would explain about the workers. They would start asking questions about those workers, about immigration status, about taxes, about... Antonio wasn't doing anything illegal. He reported everything properly, paid all taxes owed. But he knew some of the workers he hired had complicated situations, and he didn't want to bring trouble to them. In addition to everything else, there was the matter of pride. Antonio Ferreira, the man who had built an empire through careful work and meticulous attention to detail, had dropped $800,000 on the street like an idiot. The story would spread. Everyone would know. He would become a joke. The foolish old man who lost a fortune through carelessness. No. He would handle this differently, quietly, discreetly. He knew practically everyone in Meadowbrook. He would start asking around, calmly, whether anyone had seen an old camping backpack left behind or picked up near Joe's grocery store. He would offer a substantial reward, say $100,000, no questions asked, a 1 in 8 chance of recovering everything. Reasonable odds. Someone who had found the backpack, once they realized how much money was inside, would likely be tempted by a risk-free reward. Probably. Hopefully. Because the alternative, that the money was simply gone, that it would never be recovered, was too much to contemplate right now. Antonio spent the rest of that Friday discreetly asking questions. He spoke with Joe about the security cameras. Joe checked the footage, but the angle didn't cover where Antonio had gotten out of the pickup, only the main parking lot. Useless. He spoke with a few shop owners on Main Street. No one had seen anything. He put word out through a few trusted people who knew everyone. If anyone suddenly showed up with an old camping backpack or started acting strangely or began spending money inexplicably, let him know. But he didn't explain exactly why. Friday night, Antonio sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey. Rare for him, he rarely drank, but today he needed it, and contemplated his situation. $800,000. It wouldn't ruin him. He had far more than that. But it hurt. Not because of the financial loss itself, but because of the stupidity of how it happened, because of the feeling of vulnerability. At 65 years old, was he getting old and careless? Should he be thinking about retirement, about handing responsibilities over to other people? The idea was unpleasant. He took a long sip of whiskey. On Monday, he would pay the workers by check and explain that there had been a change of plans. They wouldn't be happy, but they would accept it. Life would go on. And maybe, just maybe, some miracle would happen and the money would be recovered. He didn't usually believe in miracles, but sometimes you have to believe in something. While Antonio drank his whiskey and contemplated his problems a few miles to the east, under the bridge where Highway 77 crossed the small, dry river, Maria Gonzalez was having the most surreal night of her entire life. She was sitting on her old mattress, hands trembling, staring at the old camping backpack she had found that afternoon. Let's rewind a few hours. Maria had woken up early that Friday, as always. Sleeping on the streets makes you sensitive to light, so she usually woke up at sunrise. She had slept poorly, too cold. Her blankets weren't enough. Another winter was approaching, and she didn't know how she was going to survive it. Each winter was harder than the last. Her body was aging, growing weaker. She had had a bad cough the previous season that had almost killed her, or at least that's how it felt. No access to a doctor. No medication other than cheap cough syrup she had bought at the pharmacy with the few coins she had managed to gather. She survived, but she was left weak. This winter could be her last, she sometimes thought. Not dramatically, just factually. People die on the streets every winter. She could be one of them. She had walked into town early looking for cans and bottles she could recycle for a few cents. You don't get much. 10 or 15 cans might get you about 60 cents, but 60 cents is 60 cents. It adds up. She had found a few cans near the park where teenagers hung out. She was walking back, passing through downtown near Joe's grocery store, when she saw it. An old camping backpack lying on the sidewalk, not in the trash, not obviously discarded as garbage, just left there. As if someone had set it down for a second and forgotten to pick it back up. Maria stopped, looked around. No one nearby. She waited maybe 2 minutes. No one came running back looking for a lost backpack. She approached. It was old, faded fabric, rusted zippers. It didn't look valuable in itself, but maybe there was something useful inside. Clothes she could wear. Food. She looked around once more. No one, then quickly picked up the backpack and started walking away toward her bridge. Her heart was pounding. Not from guilt. She had waited, no one showed up, it was clearly abandoned, but from nervousness about carrying something in a busy area where people sometimes yelled at her to go away. She walked quickly until she was out of downtown, then more slowly as she followed the highway toward her bridge. It took 20 minutes. She climbed down the embankment to her spot under the bridge, set the backpack on the ground, sat down, and took a deep breath. Then, with hands that were trembling slightly, part anticipation, part cold, always cold now, she opened the zipper and looked inside and froze completely. Money. The backpack was full of money, not a few loose bills, bundles and bundles of $100 bills, each bundle as thick as a deck of cards, secured with a white bank paper band. Maria stopped breathing for a moment. This couldn't be real. Was it a prank? Fake money? Some kind of strange test? She picked up one of the bundles, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She examined the bills. They looked real. They felt real. She had never held a $100 bill in her entire life, so how would she know the difference between real and fake? But they looked real. They smelled like money. They had the right weight. She began pulling the bundles out of the backpack, placing them on the ground in front of her. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20. She lost count. There were so many. Each bundle had 100 bills. She counted one carefully, her hands shaking so much she had to start over twice. 100 $100 bills, $10,000 in one bundle. And there were, she tried to count the bundles, 60, 70, 80. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was an amount of money her mind simply could not process. Maria sat there, surrounded by more money than she had seen in her entire life combined, and began to cry. Not tears of joy. Not yet. Tears of shock, of confusion, of absolute disbelief that this was happening. She cried for maybe 5 minutes, deep sobs that shook her thin body. When she finally stopped, when she wiped her eyes with her dirty hands, she looked at the money again. It was still there. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. And then her mind started working again, started processing the implications. With this money, God, with this money she could do anything, literally anything. She could leave Meadowbrook, take a bus to another city, another state, Dallas, Houston, a big place where she could disappear, rent an apartment, no, buy a small apartment, buy new clothes, new shoes. Her shoes were so worn out that her left foot had a hole in the sole. She could feel the ground when she walked. Go to a doctor. To a dentist. Her teeth were rotting. She could feel it, causing constant pain she had learned to ignore. Because what choice did she have? Eat real food, not garbage, meat, fresh vegetables, fruit, sleep in a bed, take a hot shower every day, live like a normal person again. All these possibilities exploded in her mind like fireworks. She could feel them, so real she could almost touch them. A different life. A life with dignity. A life where she wasn't invisible, wasn't despised, wasn't less than human. She sat there, surrounded by the money, dreaming of these possibilities for maybe an hour. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows shifted under the bridge, and Maria remained motionless, lost in fantasies of the life she could have. But then, slowly, something else began to break through the fantasy. A small, irritating voice at the back of her mind. This money isn't yours. It belongs to someone else. Someone lost this. Maria tried to ignore the voice. Who cares who it belongs to? They were careless enough to lose it. They probably have a lot more. They won't even miss it. But the voice persisted. You know it isn't right. Taking this would be stealing. No matter how you justify it, it would be theft. But I need this, Maria whispered out loud, to herself, to the voice, maybe to God. I need it so much. I need it more than whoever lost it." The voice didn't answer with words, but she felt the answer anyway. Needing something doesn't make it right. Wrong is wrong, no matter how badly you need the outcome. Maria squeezed her eyes shut. Why did this have to be complicated? Why couldn't it be simple? She found money, she kept money, life got better. Why did she have to have this irritating conscience insisting that the easy path was the wrong path? She looked back into the backpack, into the side pockets she hadn't checked yet. In one of them, she found an old leather wallet. Inside the wallet were some cards: driver's license, credit cards, insurance card. She looked at the license. Antonio Ferreira. A photo of an older man with grey hair, a serious expression. Address: Santa Rosa Farm, Route 12, Meadowbrook, TX. A place, a name. A real person who had lost this. Not an abstract corporation, not an impersonal bank, a person. Maria put the wallet back. She pulled open the other side pocket. Inside was a bank receipt. She unfolded it and read slowly. Reading wasn't easy for her. Her education had been minimal, and 8 years on the streets hadn't improved her skills. First National Texas Bank. Date: today. Transaction: withdrawal. Amount: $800,000 or $800,000. She had found, literally, $800,000. The magnitude of it hit her again. It wasn't a million, but it was close. It was more money than she could spend in a lifetime if she lived modestly. It was the solution to every problem she had, but it was also, clearly, legitimate money belonging to a legitimate person who had withdrawn it from a bank for some legitimate reason. It was not drug money. It was not stolen money that she would be stealing from a thief. It was money earned by someone who had worked for it, who was using it for a purpose, and who had lost it accidentally. Maria spent that entire Friday night awake. She didn't touch the money again after that first inspection. She simply sat on her old mattress, hands on her knees, staring at the backpack and the stacks of money arranged around her as if they were dangerous snakes, thinking, arguing with herself, fighting the hardest decision she had ever had to make. "If I take this," she said out loud in the darkness, "I could survive the winter. I could live. If I don't take it, I'll eventually die on the streets. Maybe this winter." So it's not really stealing, it's survival. The natural right to survive overrides property rules, doesn't it? Silence. The bridge offered no answer, only the distant sound of the occasional car passing overhead. "But," she continued, speaking to herself, "after 8 years alone on the streets, you develop the habit of vocalized inner conversations. If I take it, who will I be? What kind of person survives at the cost of her own soul?" That was the real question, she realized. Not whether she would be caught. She probably wouldn't. Not whether it was technically legal or not. But who she would be afterward. What kind of person she would see in the mirror. Not that she had a mirror, but metaphorically. Maria had lost almost everything over the years. She had lost her husband, her home, her job, her stability, her health, her dignity. But she had kept, somewhere deep inside, a sense of herself. A sense that she was still a good person, an honest person, a decent person. Circumstances had destroyed her life, but they had not corrupted who she fundamentally was. If she took this money, knowing it belonged to someone else, knowing it was wrong, it would change something essential inside her. She would become a different kind of person, a kind of person she did not want to be. And realizing that her identity, her sense of who Maria Gonzalez was the last thing she had left, and that she could not allow it to be taken even by the temptation of $800,000. Realizing that, the decision became clear, terrible, painful, almost impossible to accept, but clear. She had to return the money. When the sun rose on Saturday morning, Maria still had not slept. She had spent the entire night battling herself, crying a few more times, being tempted hundreds of times to simply take some of the money, just a few bundles. No one would miss maybe 20 or 30,000 out of 800,000. She would return the rest. That would be fair, right? But she took nothing, because she knew that if she took anything, rationalization would become easier. Take a little more, until she had taken everything anyway, and no justification in the world would change what she had become. When the sun was fully up, around 6:30 in the morning, Maria carefully put all the money back into the backpack. She closed the zippers, picked up the backpack. God, it was heavy. She hadn't really noticed before. 8 kilograms of money is heavy, and put it on her back. Her shoulders immediately protested. She hadn't carried anything heavy in years. Her body wasn't used to it. But she tightened the straps and started walking. The receipt had said Route 12. She generally knew where that was. A rural area outside the city to the west. She started walking in that direction. She didn't have money for a bus. Not that Meadowbrook had a bus anyway. She would walk no matter how far it was. She stopped at a gas station along the way to ask for specific directions. "Excuse me," she said to the clerk, a young man maybe 20 years old, who looked at her with a mix of surprise and discomfort. Homeless people make others uncomfortable. She knew that. She was used to those looks. "Can you tell me how to get to Santa Rosa Farm on Route 12? "Santa Rosa," the young man repeated. "That's far, like 6 to 7 miles from here. You're going to walk?" As if the idea were absurd. "Yes," Maria said simply. "Which way?" He gave directions. She thanked him. She started walking. It took 3 hours. 3 hours walking along rural roads, the weight of the backpack making her shoulders scream, her feet, in those horrible shoes with holes, bleeding inside the sneakers, every step agony. She had to stop and rest 6 times, sitting on the side of the road, putting the backpack on the ground, letting circulation return to her shoulders. At every stop, the temptation came back. "You're suffering. For what? Just keep the money. You deserve it. You're literally bleeding to return this." But every time, after a few minutes of rest, she put the backpack back on and kept walking. Because she had to finish. If she stopped now, all the pain up to that point would have been wasted. And besides, some part of her was finding something in the pain. Not pleasure, exactly, but purpose. She was doing something difficult, something right, something that mattered. The first time in 8 years she had felt purpose. Finally, a little after 9:30 in the morning, she saw a sign, Santa Rosa Farm, private property. A gravel driveway led away from the main road. She turned onto it, walked another 1/3 of a mile. God, when would this end? And finally saw buildings. A large but simple house, barns, cultivated fields stretching in all directions. It was beautiful, she had to admit. Peaceful. The kind of place where you could imagine living a good life. An honest life. She saw a man coming out of one of the barns. Older, grey hair, simple work clothes. He matched the photo on the driver's license. It had to be him. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice hoarse from disuse and exhaustion. "Sir!" The man turned and looked at her. He started walking toward her. As he got closer, Maria saw his expression change from neutral to confused to shocked when he recognized what she was carrying. That's my backpack," he said, his voice full of disbelief. Maria took the backpack off with hands trembling from exhaustion and held it out to him. "Yes," she said. "I found it in town yesterday. I saw your name on a card inside. I brought it back." Antonio took the backpack as if it were a sacred object, opened it, looked inside. His expression went through several emotions in seconds. Relief, joy, confusion, and then something deeper that Maria couldn't fully identify. When he looked back at her, there were tears in his eyes. You brought it back," he said, his voice breaking. $800,000. You brought it back." "It's yours," Maria said. "It's not mine." Those simple words, spoken in a hoarse voice by a homeless woman who had nothing, who was literally slowly dying from deprivation and exposure, who had just walked 3 hours in absolute pain to return a fortune that could have completely changed her life. Those words broke something inside Antonio. He set the backpack on the ground, and then he hugged Maria. He simply pulled her into an embrace, this dirty stranger, this woman in terrible circumstances, and held her as if she were the most precious person in the world. Maria stiffened at first. No one had touched her with kindness in 8 years. The touches she received on the streets were hostile or dangerous, but then she felt the sincerity of the gesture, felt that it was safe, felt that it was real, and she collapsed. She began to cry on the shoulder of this stranger, 8 years of pain and loneliness and despair, pouring out in sobs that seemed endless. Antonio just held her, let her cry, his own tears falling silently. Two strangers, united by a moment of extraordinary honesty in a world that rarely values such things. When they finally separated, both wiping their faces, both a little embarrassed but somehow lighter, Antonio said, "What's your name?" "Maria," she replied, her voice still shaking. "Maria Gonzalez." "Maria," Antonio repeated, as if tasting the name. "Maria, you just did something. I don't even have words. The most honest, most incredible thing I've ever seen anyone do in 65 years of life." "I just did what was right," Maria said, looking down, uncomfortable with the praise. She didn't feel heroic. She felt exhausted, in pain, and still a little regretful that she hadn't kept at least some of the money, even knowing she couldn't have. "No," Antonio said firmly. "You did much more than just what was right. You had every reason in the world to take that money. No one would have known. No one would have judged you. Many people would say it was justified given your circumstances." He shook his head in admiration. "But you didn't take it, and that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of person you are." "I'm not special," Maria murmured. "I just didn't want to become someone else." "Exactly," Antonio said. "You protected who you are, your integrity, and that has value that cannot be bought or measured." He looked at her properly for the first time, the skin aged far beyond her years, the body far too thin, the clothes in terrible condition, the shoes that were more hole than shoe, the blood he could see staining the sneakers where her feet had bled. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked. "Yesterday," Maria said. "I found something in the trash behind the restaurant." The factual simplicity of the way she said it, without self-pity, just stating the reality of her life, broke Antonio's heart again. "Come," he said, picking up the backpack with one hand and gently guiding her with the other toward the house. "Let's get you some food, and then we'll talk." "You don't have to," Maria began. "I'm not doing charity," Antonio interrupted gently. "I'm doing what any decent person would do when someone does them an enormous favor. Come, please. Let me at least give you breakfast." Maria was too tired to argue. She followed him into the house. It was beautiful inside, simple, but clean, well-maintained. It smelled like coffee and something cooking. There was a woman in the kitchen, an older woman with grey hair pulled into a bun, an apron over simple clothes. She looked up when they entered, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Antonio? Who is—" "Mrs. Rosa," Antonio said. "This is Maria. She just did me a very great favor. Can you make breakfast for her, please? Whatever we have available, everything we have available." Mrs. Rosa, Antonio's housekeeper for 15 years, a practical woman who had seen many things in her life and was not easily shocked, assessed Maria with a single look. She saw what there was to see, a woman in terrible circumstances, starving, exhausted, in urgent need of help. "Yes, of course," Mrs. Rosa said warmly. Sit down, dear. I'll make eggs, bacon, toast and coffee. As much as you can eat." Maria sat in the kitchen chair, feeling the surreal nature of everything. Yesterday, she had been sleeping under a bridge. Now she was in a beautiful kitchen smelling of coffee and bacon while a kind woman cooked for her. It was too much to process. Antonio sat across from her. "Maria, I need to know. Where are you living? Do you have anywhere to go?" Maria hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she was also ashamed. I'm under the bridge, on Highway 77, outside the city." "How long?" Antonio asked gently. 8 years, Maria admitted, her voice small. 8 years on the streets. The silence that followed was heavy. Mrs. Rosa, at the stove, stopped stirring the eggs for a moment. 8 years. That was a long time, long enough to change a person, either harden them or break them. And here was Maria, after 8 years of the worst kind of adversity, still capable of returning $800,000, still capable of doing the right thing when no one would be watching or knowing or judging. "Not anymore," Antonio said decisively. "You're staying here today. You're going to take a bath, eat real food, sleep in a bed, and tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. But you are not going back under that bridge. Never again." Maria looked at him, tears threatening to fall again. "Why? You got your money back. You don't owe me anything." "This isn't about owing," Antonio said. "It's about recognizing something rare when I see it. True character, real honesty, and those things are priceless, Maria. You showed me something I needed to see. That real goodness still exists in the world. Let me return a little of that goodness." Mrs. Rosa brought over a plate of food. More food than Maria had seen on a single plate in 8 years. Scrambled eggs, 4 slices of bacon, 2 buttered pieces of toast, fruit in a bowl on the side. Maria stared at the food as if it were a mirage. "Eat," Mrs. Rosa encouraged. "Eat everything, and there's more if you need it." Maria picked up the fork with trembling hands. She put the first bite of eggs into her mouth. The flavor exploded on her tongue. Simple seasoning, salt and pepper, but for someone who had eaten garbage for years, it was better than any gourmet restaurant could ever be. She ate slowly at first, her body almost having forgotten how to process real food. Then faster as true hunger took over. She ate everything, every crumb. When she finished, Mrs. Rosa brought more. "Slow down this time," she warned. "You'll get sick if you eat too fast after starving." Maria ate the second portion more slowly. Then she drank coffee, real coffee, hot, sweet. It was heaven. When she finished, Antonio said, "Mrs. Rosa, could you prepare the guest room and find some clean clothes, maybe something we have around that Maria can wear while we wash her clothes?" "Of course," Mrs. Rosa said. She disappeared deeper into the house. Antonio turned to Maria. "You must be exhausted. You can take a bath, change into clean clothes, and sleep as long as you need. When you wake up, we'll talk about next steps. But today, just rest." Maria wanted to argue, but she was so tired. 3 hours of walking, with a heavy backpack after a sleepless night, then a full stomach for the first time in so long. She could feel exhaustion pulling her down like a tide. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "You already thanked me," Antonio interrupted, "by returning what was mine when you could have easily not done so. That's thanks enough for a lifetime." Mrs. Rosa returned. "The room is ready. Come, dear, I'll show you where the bathroom is." Maria followed Mrs. Rosa as if in a dream. Mrs. Rosa showed her a small guest bathroom. It had a real bathtub, not just a shower. Clean towels were stacked neatly. Shampoo and soap were new, still in their packaging. "Take your time," Mrs. Rosa said. "The hot water won't run out. There are clean clothes on the bed for when you're done. More or less your size. I had to guess, but I think they'll fit. Leave your dirty clothes in the basket and I'll wash them." When Mrs. Rosa left and closed the door, Maria was alone for the first time since she arrived. She looked at the mirror above the sink, the first time she had seen her reflection in months. What she saw shocked her. An old-looking woman stared back. Grey, tangled hair. A face carved with deep wrinkles, skin blotched and damaged by the sun, eyes that had seen too much hardship. She looked 70. She was 52. Tears came again, kept coming today, 8 years of suppressed tears finally finding release. But she wiped them away. Time for that later. Now, the bath. She filled the tub with hot water. She took off her dirty clothes. She had to peel them off, literally, in some places where dirt and sweat had glued them to her skin. She looked at her body. Far too thin, ribs visible, skin hanging loosely where there had once been muscle, bruises of unknown origin, feet in terrible condition, broken nails, thick calluses, open cuts where her shoes had rubbed. She stepped into the tub. The hot water hurt at first. Her body wasn't used to it. It felt too intense. But then she relaxed into the warmth, let it sink into cold, tense muscles. She sat there for a long time, just absorbing the heat, letting it heal something in her that had been cold for 8 years. Eventually she picked up the soap. It smelled like lavender, and began to wash, scrubbing years of dirt and shame and despair from her skin. She washed her hair twice, then a third time. The water turned dark grey with filth. She drained it and filled the tub again with clean water, washed more. Finally, after maybe 40 minutes, she stepped out feeling cleaner than she had felt in, she couldn't remember when. The clothes Mrs. Rosa had left were simple but clean. Jeans that were a little big but had a belt, a soft flannel shirt, new underwear and socks still with the tags on, even simple slippers that fit better than her destroyed shoes. She got dressed and looked in the mirror again. She still looked old, still looked worn, but clean. Human. She left the bathroom. Mrs. Rosa was waiting in the hallway. "The bedroom is here," she said, opening a door. Inside was a bed, a real one, with a clean mattress, pillows and a blanket. Maria stared at it as if it were an alien object. "Sleep as long as you need," Mrs. Rosa said gently. "No one will bother you. When you wake up, I'll be in the kitchen. I can make whatever you want to eat." Maria just nodded, speechless. Mrs. Rosa left, quietly closing the door. Maria walked over to the bed, touched the mattress. Soft, so soft. She lay down on top of the blankets at first, not daring to crawl under them, feeling undeserving even in clean clothes. But the mattress was so comfortable. Her body hurt in 1,000 places from the walk, the tension, years of sleeping on concrete. And now she was in a real bed. She began to cry again. Apparently she couldn't stop today, but these were different tears. Not tears of pain, but of relief, of being safe, clean, fed, in a bed. Such simple things, so precious. She cried herself to sleep, and she slept deeply for the first time in 8 years. When Maria woke up, it was dark. For a moment of panic, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came back. The backpack, the walk, Antonio, the food, the bath, the bed. She was still here. It wasn't a dream. She sat up. There was a clock on the nightstand. 7:30 p.m. She had slept. How long? She must have lain down around 1 in the afternoon. More than 6 hours. And she felt more rested than she had in years. She left the room quietly. Voices were coming from the kitchen. She followed the sound. Mrs. Rosa and Antonio were sitting at the kitchen table, apparently finishing dinner. They looked up when she entered. "Maria," Mrs. Rosa said warmly, "you're awake. How do you feel?" "Better," Maria admitted. "Much better. Thank you for everything." "Are you hungry?" Mrs. Rosa asked. "I made stew, and there's bread." Maria was hungry again. Amazing how quickly her body responded to regular food. "Yes, please." Mrs. Rosa served her a large bowl of stew, meat, potatoes, carrots, smelling wonderful, and a piece of homemade bread still warm. Maria ate more slowly this time, savoring each bite, aware that Antonio was watching, but not in an uncomfortable way, more thoughtful. When she finished, he said, "Maria, we need to talk about what comes next for you, and I have a proposal to make." Maria set down her spoon. "A proposal?" "I want to offer you a job," Antonio said directly. "Here on the farm, helping Mrs. Rosa with the house, maybe with small tasks around the property. Nothing too physical, light work, fair pay, housing included." Maria blinked. "Why? You already got your money back. You don't need to give me a job." "This isn't about need," Antonio explained. "It's about want. Maria, you showed me something today that I rarely see in the business world where I spend most of my time. Absolute honesty, real integrity. Those qualities are more valuable than any skill or experience. I want people like that around me. And besides," he added more softly, "you clearly need help. A new beginning. I can offer that. Why wouldn't I?" I don't know if I can," Maria said honestly. "I've been broken for so long. I don't know if I remember how to function normally, how to have a job, responsibilities." "Then we learn together," Antonio said, "one day at a time, no pressure. You try, do your best, and we see how it goes. If it doesn't work, no hard feelings. But it's worth trying, isn't it?" Maria thought. What alternative did she have? Going back under the bridge? Now that she had experienced real food, hot water, a clean bed, how could she return to that? But part of her was scared. Scared to try and fail. Scared to hope again, only to be crushed. "How long?" she asked hesitantly. "How long can I stay?" "As long as you want," Antonio replied. "There's no time limit. If it works, you stay, that's it." "And what kind of pay?" Maria asked, feeling strange even discussing money after not handling real money for 8 years. $20 an hour to start," Antonio said. 40 hours a week, 800 a week after taxes, plus housing and meals included. And after 3 months, if you're doing well, we'll discuss a raise." $800 a week. It was a fortune to Maria, more than she could imagine having. "And if I mess everything up?" she asked quietly. "If I can't do the work, if it's too hard, if I—" "Then we cross that bridge when we get there," Antonio said. "But I won't give up on you, Maria, as long as you don't give up on yourself. Deal?" Maria felt tears again, but these were different. Hope. Real hope for the first time in a decade. "Deal," she whispered. And so began the transformation of Maria Gonzalez. The first few days were difficult. Her body was not used to regular work, even light work. She helped Mrs. Rosa with household tasks, washing dishes, sweeping floors, folding clothes. Simple things, but they left her exhausted because years of malnutrition and stress had drained her reserves. Her mind struggled as well. She had moments of panic when she couldn't remember how to do basic things. How to use the washing machine. She hadn't used one in 8 years. The technology had changed. The buttons were confusing. Mrs. Rosa showed her patiently, without judgment. How to organize the pantry. There was a specific system, frequently used items in front, less frequent ones in the back. Maria kept doing it wrong. Her brain couldn't retain the instructions. Mrs. Rosa gently corrected her and showed her again. There were moments of shame, too, when she accidentally broke a plate because her hands still trembled sometimes, when she didn't hear Mrs. Rosa calling her because she was lost in thought, reliving some memory from the streets. When she woke up in the middle of the night, screaming from a nightmare, and Mrs. Rosa came running, and Maria had to explain through sobs about the night she was almost attacked under the bridge, and how she was never really safe. Never. But Mrs. Rosa and Antonio were patient, infinitely patient. "You went through trauma," Mrs. Rosa explained. 8 years of trauma. You won't heal in a week or a month. It takes time. But you have time now. Here, you have time. Antonio helped in practical ways as well. He scheduled an appointment with the town doctor, Dr. Harrison, explained Maria's situation, and requested a full examination. Dr. Harrison found many issues: severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, early-stage diabetes from years of poor diet, extensive dental problems, some heart damage from prolonged stress. "It will take time to fix all of this," Dr. Harrison said, "but it's fixable. You were very lucky, Mrs. Gonzalez. A few more years on the streets and some of these problems would have become irreversible." Antonio paid for all the treatment. When Maria protested, he simply said, "It's part of the job's benefits package. Health insurance. We have it, you're on it. End of discussion." He also paid for the dentist. Root canals, some teeth had to be extracted, others repaired. It was painful, but necessary. And for the first time in years, Maria could eat without constant pain. Slowly, over weeks and then months, Maria began to heal. Physically first, she gained weight, healthy weight. Her clothes became less loose. Mrs. Rosa noticed and got her clothes that fit properly. Her skin improved as her nutrition improved, and she was no longer constantly exposed to the elements. Her hair, which she cut shorter to make it more manageable, began to grow back healthy. Mentally, it was slower. She still had nightmares, though less frequently. She still had moments of panic when something reminded her of the streets. She still struggled with depression, days when she felt hopeless, even though she objectively knew her life was better. Antonio gently suggested therapy. "There's no shame in it," he said. "You went through a lot. Talking to a professional can help." Maria was skeptical at first. Therapy was a luxury for rich people, not for someone like her. But eventually she agreed to try. The therapist, Mrs. Chen, yes, the same Mrs. Chen from the laundromat, she was also a licensed part-time therapist, was wonderful. Gentle, non-judgmental, she helped Maria process trauma in a way she had never been able to on her own. "You survived," Mrs. Chen said during a session. "You went through 8 years of hell and survived. That is not weakness, that is incredible strength." "I don't feel strong," Maria admitted. "I feel broken." "You can be both," Mrs. Chen said. "Broken and strong. They are not mutually exclusive." 3 months into her new job, Antonio held a formal review. He sat with Maria in his simple living room. "You're doing well," he said. "Mrs. Rosa tells me you're a reliable, hard-working employee. So according to our agreement, let's discuss a raise." "There's no need," Maria began. "What you've already given me is more than $25 an hour," Antonio interrupted. "That's $1,000 a week before taxes. Fair?" "It's more than fair," Maria said, her voice trembling. It's too generous." "It's not generous," Antonio corrected. "It's what you're worth. And speaking of that, there's something else to discuss." He slid an envelope across the table. "What is this?" Maria asked cautiously. "Open it." She opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a deed. She had to read it twice to understand. A deed to a small house in town, Meadowbrook. Address, 243 Oak Street. Name on the deed, Maria Gonzalez. "I don't understand," she said, confused. "It's yours," Antonio explained. "The house. I bought it for you. It's fully paid off." "What?" Maria felt dizzy. You can't. This is too much. I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Antonio said firmly but gently. "Maria, you need stability, security, knowing you have a place that is yours, that no one can take away. The house isn't big, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, small but decent. But it's yours." "But why?" Maria was crying again. "Why are you doing all this?" "Because you returned $800,000 to me," Antonio said. "This?" He pointed to the deed. "The house cost $140,000. The second document is a bank statement. I put 50,000 into an account in your name. So total, 190,000, not even a quarter of what you returned to me. But I didn't return it expecting a reward, Maria protested. I know, Antonio said. That's exactly why you deserve this. Maria, you had a chance to completely change your life. You were literally dying on the streets and found more money than you would see in multiple lifetimes. And you returned it because it was the right thing to do. That is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen. He leaned forward. This isn't charity, and it's not payment for the money. That money was mine anyway. You were simply returning what already belonged to me. This is recognition. Recognition that you taught me something valuable, that you showed me real goodness still exists in the world. That's worth more than any amount. Maria couldn't stop crying. She looked at the deed, at the bank statement, at Antonio. I don't know what to say. Say you accept, Antonio suggested. Say you'll use these resources to build a good life. Say you understand that you deserve this. I accept, Maria whispered, and I will. I will make you proud. I'll work hard. I'll be a better person. You're already a good person, Antonio interrupted. That's why I'm doing this. Now, about the house. You can move in whenever you want. Or if you prefer to keep living here on the farm, you can do that too, and use the house however you like. Your choice. I just wanted you to know you have options now. You have your own home. You have money in the bank. You have a job. You have security. Maria thought for a moment. Can I keep working here? At least for a while. I like the work. I like Mrs. Rosa, and I'm not ready to live alone yet. I still get scared sometimes. Of course you can, Antonio said. As I said, your options. The house will be there when you're ready. Thank you, Maria said, the word feeling completely inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done. Thank you isn't enough, but it's all I have. It's more than enough, Antonio said. And so life went on. Maria worked on the farm, saved her salary. She didn't spend much. Habits from 8 years of poverty don't disappear quickly. She visited her house periodically, went there on weekends, slowly furnishing it with things she bought with her own money. She wanted it to be hers in every sense, not just on paper, but as a home shaped by her own choices. 6 months after that day on the road, the story of what Maria had done eventually spread through Meadowbrook. Not because Maria told it, she never spoke about it. But Joe Patterson at his grocery store had noticed Antonio asking about a lost backpack months earlier, then saw Maria working on the farm and made the connection. He mentioned it to a few people. The story spread. Did you hear about the homeless woman who returned a fortune? She was living under the bridge and returned $800,000. Incredible. Who would do that? A saint, obviously. She must be a saint. The local newspaper wanted to do a story about her. Maria refused. I didn't do anything special, she insisted. I just returned what wasn't mine. But to the town of Meadowbrook, it was special. It was extraordinary. And without seeking it, Maria became a kind of quiet local celebrity. People greeted her warmly when they saw her in town. You're Maria, right? The one who returned the money? You're a good person. She was invited to church, to community events, to coffee and meals by people who wanted to meet her, to understand what kind of person does what she did. And Maria, who had been invisible for 8 years, who had been treated as less than human, was suddenly being seen. Truly seen. Valued not for what she had, but for who she was. It was strange at first. Uncomfortable. She didn't feel worthy of the attention. But slowly she began to accept that maybe, just maybe, she really had done something remarkable, and maybe she deserved the good that was coming her way. 1 year after that day on the road, Meadowbrook organized a small community event in the town square. It was a tribute, Maria discovered. She went reluctantly, only because Antonio insisted. The mayor gave a speech. "In times when we often hear about the worst of humanity," he said, "it's important to celebrate the best." Maria Gonzalez showed us that honesty, integrity, and kindness do not depend on wealth or status. They depend on choice, and Maria made the right choice when most of us would not have. He presented Maria with a symbolic plaque, "Honored Citizen of Meadowbrook," which she accepted with tears and discomfort, feeling unworthy but deeply moved. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came afterward, when she was talking with a group of local schoolchildren who were present. A girl of about 8 asked, "Didn't you want to keep the money, not even a little?" Maria crouched down to the girl's level. "I did," she admitted honestly. "Very much. But do you know what I learned? Doing the right thing isn't about what you want. Sometimes doing the right thing hurts. Sometimes it's the hardest choice, but you still do it because the kind of person you choose to be matters more than any amount of money." "And what if I'm not strong enough to do the right thing?" the girl asked. "You are," Maria said with conviction. "Everyone is. You just have to decide that your integrity, who you are on the inside, is more important than what you can gain on the outside." The girl thought about it, then nodded. "I think I understand." And Maria realized that maybe, just maybe, her experience, all the pain, all the struggle, all the difficulty of the decision she made, had a purpose beyond herself. Maybe she could be an example. Not a perfect example, God knew she was far from perfect, but an example that broken people can still do good things, that people at their lowest moments can still choose integrity, that where you are does not determine who you are. 2 years after that day on the road, Maria finally moved into her house permanently. She was ready now, strong enough, confident enough to live independently. She still worked on the farm, and probably always would, she decided, because she liked the work and she liked Antonio and Mrs. Rosa, who had become a kind of surrogate family for her. But having her own home, her own space, represented the final chapter of her recovery. She was painting the living room one Saturday when there was a knock at the door. She opened it. It was a young woman, maybe 25, looking nervous and exhausted. "Are you Maria?" the woman asked. "Yes," Maria confirmed. "Can I help you?" "My name is Jennifer," the woman said. "I heard your story about how you returned the money, and I needed to meet you. I needed to understand how you did it." "Come in," Maria said, recognizing something in the young woman's eyes. Desperation, perhaps, or searching for something. Jennifer came in. They sat on the modest sofa Maria had bought. "Why did you need to understand?" Maria asked gently. Jennifer hesitated, then said, "Because I'm in a bad situation. Debt, mostly medical. My daughter was sick and I have a chance to do something that would solve the problem. Something not exactly legal, but no one would find out, and I'm trying to decide whether to do it or not." "And you thought my story might help you decide?" Maria asked. "Yes," Jennifer admitted, "because you were in a worse position than me, much worse, and you still did the right thing. So how? How did you find the strength?" Maria thought for a long moment. "It wasn't strength," she said finally. "It was understanding what I would lose if I did the wrong thing. Not talking about getting caught. I mean what I would lose in here." She touched her chest. "Who I was, the last thing I had. If I had taken that money, I would have gained financial security but lost my soul, and I realized there's no amount of money worth that." "But what if I don't have a soul left to lose?" Jennifer asked bitterly. "I've already done so many things I'm not proud of." "Then this is your chance to start over," Maria said, "not by taking the wrong shortcut, by building things the right way. It will take longer, it will be harder, but in the end, you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror." Jennifer was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "What should I do?" "I can't tell you that," Maria replied. It's your choice. But I can tell you that if you choose to do the right thing, even if it's hard, there are people who will help you. Let me give you Antonio's number, the man who helped me. Maybe he knows resources for medical debt. Maybe there are other options you haven't considered. She wrote down the number and handed it to Jennifer. And if I decide to do the wrong thing? Jennifer asked. Would you judge me? I'm nobody to judge, Maria said, but I would be sad. Because I know you're better than that. We all are better than our worst choices, if we choose to be. Jennifer left shortly afterward. Maria never knew what choice she made, but 6 months later she received a card in the mail. Thank you for our conversation. I chose the hard path. It was tough, but you were right. I sleep better now. Jennifer. Maria placed the card in a frame on the wall, a reminder that her story had an impact beyond herself, that kindness inspires kindness, that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, can change not only your life, but also the lives of people you don't even know. And as she looked at that card, at her small, clean house, thinking about her work on the farm and her friends in Meadowbrook and the life she had built from scratch, not with 800,000 found dollars, but with honesty and hard work, Maria understood something profound. She had made the right choice that day, not because it led to material rewards, although it had, but because it allowed her to become a person she was proud to be. And that, in the end, was the only wealth that truly mattered, the wealth of integrity, the wealth of a clear conscience, the wealth of knowing that when tested, when given every reason to do wrong, she chose to do right anyway. And that was something no amount of money could ever buy.